Welcome to the 2-month review, the only books podcast out there that's more excited for the next Planet of the Apes movie than they are for the Pen America Book Awards. We are a weekly podcast that takes a giant book, in this case, Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright, breaks it down bit by bit, section by section, talks about it, analyzes it, has a good time, makes some jokes. How are you doing, Kaya Stromanis, my guest for today?
I've not only read this chapter, but I've read the right chapter for today. So I am marvelous. Thank you. How are you?
Excellent job. I'm doing okay. And this week we are only a twosome and not a threesome. So you know what that means, right?
More work for me.
We can put the cuck chair away.
More work for me.
less fun, maybe. Anyways, we are talking about Praiseworthy, as you mentioned, and this week we were set to go up to page 400 in the printed American version. I'm not certain anymore that any of these numbers line up whatsoever, which is most of the chapter Goddess of the Scales. I actually read ahead. I finished Goddess of the Scales, so through 416, like 16 extra pages. So we can talk about that too, but it did give me a couple ideas about the larger frame of this book and ways to talk about it. But before we get into that, I do want to say that, like usual, reading my book, thinking of like weird things that we could do at the beginning of this podcast, and I came across one particular phrase, bogan, which you know, apparently.
Yeah.
Which just shows up in the middle. I forget what page it is. Oh, here it is. 380. A bogie bogan type of peasant people is the phrase, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck that is. That is some Australia right there.
Mm-hmm.
But you knew.
I know what bogan is.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is bogan?
Bogan is the Australian equivalent of like white trash.
And how do you know this word?
Oh God. I know this word, unfortunately, because I watched this TV show, very, very short TV show called Summer Heights High, which you can only watch through YouTube now. I think it's on some streaming platforms, but it probably shouldn't be. It's sort of controversial. I forget what the comedian's name is, but I think he's from New Zealand, not Australia as well.
His name is Chris. Oh wait, yeah, Chris Lilly.
Chris Lilly, yeah. He's a comedian. He plays multiple characters in this Summer Heights High. It's about a high school, and there's like a drama teacher and an exchange student who's from like an all-girls prep school. And it's not really an exchange. It's like but she says bogan a lot. And that everything's always so random. And yeah, she thinks she finds these like the character's name is Jamie, and it looks like Jamie with a few apostrophes or something. But yeah, it's this like rich girl. It refers to nearly everything as bogan, and she's like super fascinated with it. Yeah, controversial because of one of the characters that Chris Lee plays, but
yeah, there's more than that.
Yeah, but
it aired on HBO.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't know. I watched it when I was in Latvia, so everything was like streamed and stolen from other places. But it is truly very funny, I think. And I think it's one of those comedy shows where the comedian is doing something interesting by playing all these roles and also how he's portraying them. One of the characters is Aboriginal kid.
Yeah.
And that's the controversial part. I didn't actually realize until years later that it's essentially the equivalent of doing blackface.
Yep.
But I didn't I don't know if it's because of the screen quality or the download quality, but I just thought that he had a wig on. I didn't really notice that he had like put any self tanner or anything on.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. But it is really fucking funny, and I cannot read this book without the spoken parts and like not hear the character of Jamie, this like preppy, prissy. This like 45-year-old man playing like a 15-year-old
Yep.
like
Yep.
bougie New Zealander white girl.
Oh God. So yeah, so he does have a lot of controversies associated with him.
Yeah.
One of the funnier ones with this book is that there's a episode in episode 3, a character named Annabelle dies after taking ecstasy, and the family of Annabelle Cat, a 20-year-old woman who died taking drugs at the 2007 Good Vibrations Festival in Sydney, complained the program was making fun of her death. So they had to start running screens saying, like, at the beginning that no character in this represents a real person. It's coincidence, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But like, whatever. There's more shows by him that get increasingly more apparently like controversial. But anyways, I've seen part of that. It's pretty funny, but you know Bogan from that.
Oh,
However,
also why I know Bogan actually is because also while living in Latvia, this is like the God, I watch so much terrible television. My roommate was watching Lost and I was watching Summer Heights High and fucking Australia's Next Top Model.
there you go.
And that's also where I know Bogan from.
Oh goodness. But
half the girls were Bogan.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, well, okay. So you know Bogan, but
I know Bogan.
How well do you actually know Australian slang terms? So we've talked several weeks now about how this book was edited for the American publication. And I think that when Emmett was on, he referenced the fact that that happens a lot because of the slang and to take out some of the slang because it is specific, right? And very, very weird. So when I hit this one, I did a little search for Australian slang terms, and I found a website called letslearnslang.com, which is obviously the most reliable source of information. They're Gen Z slang though. Like I knew all that one. So like, I'm like, maybe this is like legit. Cause like this is, I guess, Gen Z slang. And so I looked through this and there's some batshit fucking terms, right? Like some truly wild terms. And I thought, how can we play a game? And since we keep comparing Australia to Canada, I figured we could play a slang game in which I can read off two slangs, one from Canada, one from slang words, slang phrases, one from Canada, one from Australia, and you have to guess which one is Australian.
Oh, I'm here for this. I'm into this.
Very, very simple. Now I'm going to throw one out. I've got so many. I don't even know if I can go through all of them, and I am going to have to keep looking up what they mean because it's a little confusing. But there's one that I'll throw out that I already used on Twitter earlier this morning is McDicks. McDicks.
What?
It's Canadian. McDicks. You want to go on down to the McDicks is going to McDonald's in Canadian slang apparently. So that's a pretty fun one. It's a pretty fun one right there. But anyways, okay. So you ready for this? You ready for some slang? Ready to play this?
I'm so ready.
There could be up to 9 rounds of this.
I'm so ready. I'm sure how random this is going to be too.
Okay. So let's start out with this one. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Which of these is Australian slang? Sanger or KD?
Can I ask for the spellings?
Sanger is Sanger and KD is KD. Like the letters.
I'm going to say KD is Australian.
No, KD is not Australian. KD is Canadian. Sanger is a sandwich in Australia, and KD is the Canadian term for a craft dinner. Example, I made some KD last night, and it was amazingly comforting.
Like the company craft?
Like the company craft. Okay. Yep. Like mac and cheese. And cheese. So.
Damn it.
Okay, here you go. This is a good one. These two really go together quite nicely. Which one is Australian? Buckle bunny or you little ripper? So
I feel like I could hear Bluey's dad saying "you little ripper."
You're correct. You're correct. You little ripper though. What do you think it means? I mean, we use that in terms of like farting. Like that has like a significant farting connotation to me. You little ripper. That is not what it means.
Is it like you little whippersnapper? Like you little like would you say it to a child in a loving way?
It means fantastic. Example, you
Oh,
built a tree house, you little ripper.
nice way to, yeah.
Yeah, so that is that. Buckle Bunny, however, is very specific. Buckle Bunny is groupies of a rodeo. The cowboy's wife was once a buckle bunny
my
who followed him
God.
all around to his competitions.
Oh my God, Buckle Bunny.
Like a
Nice.
ski bunny, but a buckle bunny,
What the
you know,
fuck?
you know? Yep. So this one, both of these are going to sound racist, and I don't think that neither of them are. Okay, so which is Australian? Fair Dinkum or Vico? VI-CO, and the other is Fair Dinkum, Dinkum, Fair Dinkum. I like saying Fair Dinkum.
I think Fair Dinkum is Australian.
You win. Fair Dinkum is Australian. Fair Dinkum means it's an expression that's the same as honestly. It's used positively and negatively depending on the situation. Fair Dinkum, what do you think you're doing? Vico, according to this website, is chocolate milk. I love to have a tall glass of Vico after work. It's my guilty pleasure, is the example they have.
Okay.
Okay, let's do two more. Two more. Okay, which one is Australian? Which one is Canadian? Whoop whoop or bog trotter?
I think bog trotter is Australian.
Unfortunately, you're wrong.
Damn it.
Bog trotter is a Canadian slang for someone who hails from the province of New Brunswick.
Oh,
He's a
it was
bog
about,
trotter.
Like, whores.
Yeah, whoop whoop is a sound, not a sound or a cheer, but a place in the middle of nowhere in Australia. We're so far away from the city. Are we going to the whoop whoop?
Oh, like the Easter bib. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there's that. That one's fun. That's fun. Okay, one last one.
Going to the whoop
Whoop whoop whoop. Are we going to the whoop whoop? Okay. This is a tough one. Okay. Canadian or Australian, or which one is Australian? Pogie or hard yaka?
Pogie.
Pogie is Canadian. It
Damn
means
it.
the state of unemployment.
Oh.
Jasper's been on Pogie since the start of the pandemic. And hard yaka was one of the first ones I found. It means work. You are the top performer in your department, and your hard yaka will be rewarded. So,
does anyone understand what anyone else is saying in that country?
It's like, I don't know. I mean, I did think of doing like slang words or like insects that can kill you, because both of these have about the same level of understanding to me.
Oh my God, yeah.
Some of the ones I didn't use though were like bottle-o. Bottle-o is like a liquor store where like teens go, where kids go, like a bottle-o, like a lamer version of a liquor store, which is weird. Lappy, I don't remember what lappy is. Let me see. Lappy is laptop. Move your lappy somewhere else.
That sounds Australian.
Yeah, pash is for two people who are about to kiss. We only had a bottle of beer before we started a pash. There's from Canada, there's hang a Roger. Do you know what hang a Roger is?
Is that a U-turn?
It's to turn right. Yes, yeah, so very close. And then this one, there's also parkade, which is a multi-story parking structure, which I think is wonderful. And then this one, which I am certain you should know. If you don't know, it's going to be your favorite word. A jam buster. You know what a jam buster is?
Is that a song that slaps?
That would be great. No, it's a jam-filled donut.
Ooh, yeah.
So, okay. Yep, the jam buster. So good stuff. Good job, Australia.
What was my score?
I think we got like 4. So no, you got 2, 3, 4. I don't know. I didn't keep track. There's no one you're beating. Who are you beating? You're playing against yourself.
Yeah, that's the most important opponent.
Yeah, well, whatever, you got one right.
No,
so
I'm playing against you. If I can
best you
you in your own game.
That's fair. I'm not trying to trick y'all. I'm just trying to have fun.
I think you are. You're not trying to. Okay, I know you, Mr. Crosswords. Oh, it's just
I only share my crossword score when it's under 20 seconds. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways,
it's the only time anyone wants to finish fast. Hi-yo.
Wow. The cuck chair is not on the program this week. Because you have to remember the chair is not on the program
right now.
right. You are right. So I want to talk about this section, but I want to talk about it in like a couple different ways. One is that I have a better idea now of what the meta structure of this book is, I think, my belief on it anyways, and how it's both interesting, a bit confounding, and alters the way that I read this book and alters my pleasure in reading this book. So I want to talk about that because now we've read 4 sections. So I have like at least 4 of the 10 bits, right? 4 or 5. Yeah, there's 10 sections in the book. Read 40% of them to get like a bit of seeing like what this grander structure is. There's also a review that Sam Rudder, a friend of the podcast, he's been on to talk about JR in that particular season. He wrote a review for the New York Times of this book. That was, I think it came out online some time ago, but it came out in print recently, which is why it popped up on my screen. I want to talk about what he had to do in his review and some of what he says in here. That's like, yeah, it came out on February 6th. Some of what he has to accomplish that we've also been doing. We tried very much the same ground in his review and on this podcast. And honestly, I did not read this until last night. But then it also brings up a question of how you talk about this book on any level other than its like historical significance. And then we can talk about the plot. But again, like with the other weeks, and this ties in the metastructure thing, the plot is not important to this book. It's the same plot every time. Aboriginal celebrities drowning. Tommy Hawk wants to get adopted by the blonde woman and have an iPad and be assimilated. Everyone's considered a pedophile. Cosman Steele wants to get his fucking donkeys. Moth Lady Dance is like talking to the moths. The people in the town are pissed. They hate the donkeys. And there's a cop there. So there's usually in each one of these sections, each one of the 4 sections, there's been those primary components, but maybe like one thing's added on. So like last time the cop shows up. There wasn't a cop before. The cop comes into our section last week. Maximum Cop God or whatever his name was. And then this week, the one event, which you may not have gotten to. So this is a bit of a spoiler. Maybe I should save that. There's one new thing that comes up in this, but I'll save that towards the end just to make sure I don't completely spoil it, but give you like a bit of a teaser maybe. See, there's a maybe we can create a cliffhanger out of this. But anyways, the plot's basically the same as it is every week. Because that's truly doesn't seem to be the point of this book at all.
I think the characters know that also.
Yeah, characters are stuck in
There's
this.
There's like literally a line where what's his name? Worldwide or widespread?
Widespread. It's the same as Cosman Steele.
And the same as Planet, right? They're all the same
Planet,
person.
yep.
Which I started keeping track of. I need to, but there's like literally a line where he's like what's the plot? Like, what's the point? I don't even know anymore. Something like that.
Oh yeah. I think I remember that time. Maybe even marked that one. But so you now have read weirdly 2 sections, but backwards.
Yeah.
But like having listened to even one podcast or talked on 2 of them, I don't know that you're missing anything. Like, I don't think you'd have to be like, oh shit, I need to go back to the beginning or else like none of this makes sense. It's like, because it is the same thing over and over and over again, it doesn't feel like a book that you need to even read linearly. It's not a book that's interested in linear storytelling at all.
I agree.
It's not, it does not care. So as a reader, I don't think you need to read it in that particular way at all. I mean, there's maybe certain things that resonate better. But honestly, I mean, I'd ask your opinion. How is it reading it like totally out of sequence and with no forward or back contextual?
Can you even call that reading? I suppose you can. No, it's interesting. Especially if you think about it against the if you think about it in context and parallel to TV shows that you can watch like that. And I know that's something that you talk about a lot when like you're watching something and you're ahead of me, or you're watching something that I haven't been watching, as an example. Reservation Dogs, and you're like, I don't really think you need to know a lot of the context. Like, my argument is always that because I know it's a good show, I want to start at the beginning anyway, and so I want to have that enjoyment. But I do think you're right that this book is like one of those TV shows where you can jump in on like episode 3 or episode 6, in case you're supposed to watch episode 3, but you didn't because you're Kaya and you don't pay attention. And it's fine. Like, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Like, this is like halfway through the book now, and it doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of progression, except that, I mean, except that there's like the literal clusterfuck happening on the beach.
Okay, so you did get to that part.
That's like, yeah, that's like the beginning of this chapter.
Yeah, where they get their asses kicked by the donkeys.
Oh, multiple times. It's like,
Yeah.
it's over
Okay.
like most of the pages. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it comes to a crescendo in like the last like 20 pages of
but
it.
it's,
So
yeah, but it's like a literal, that's like the only big action that seems
yeah.
to happen, is that there's this literal clusterfuck where they're like, do you not see it from the Google sky? And the satellites, police officers.
Yep.
But
And the donkeys are just wrecking house on the beach,
Yeah,
and Cosmo feels like lost somewhere with his broke down ass car.
and his
Falcon
donkey. Chasing the right donkey.
trying to find the platinum donkey to replace Qantas so that they can have transport. I mean, it's the same. I could say these same words every single week.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like this never changes. But yeah, the ass kicking by the donkeys was pretty fun.
And the donkeys, like, we could talk about that more, but like, there's a line where the people are like, these donkeys are like ruining everything, and the donkeys by now are like kind of into the sea breeze, and they're like, there's more space here than we had before, so we might just stick around. Like, these poor donkeys, like, they're not sentient. They're not sentient in the way of like but yeah, the reading style and that, I agree. I don't think that you would need to read it linearly. There are a few events or plot points that clearly are linear, like the car breaking down, or Aboriginal sovereignty going into the ocean, disappearing, but everything else is this, like, not cyclical but elliptical.
Yeah, yes. I don't want to talk about that right now, but there is one other teaser, not teaser, but the one other new part to this that comes up more strongly in the last few pages isn't necessarily the donkey thing is part of that, and like Cosmo feels like, it's huge crime scene now. Why the fuck am I going to this place? Like, I don't care about Praiseworthy, native title, blah blah blah. But the other thing is that Dance becomes obsessed with the idea that she's Chinese and wants to go be brought to China, and emigrate to China. And there's some bits about that I think will lead into like a future iteration like that will be out there. But the thing that came clear both through Sam references this in his review, which I do want to talk about too. But the thing that I was finding as I was reading this is that it is cyclical, almost like an ellipses or like some circle where the main point is there's this city. There's a haze over this city. Aboriginal sovereignty is gone. Wants to get donkeys, moths, Tommy Hawk. There's like a few elements, and every chapter goes through every one of those elements as if the storytelling process is, let's check in on each one of our characters and what they're doing. That's the same as what they were doing before, but give them like a new chance to tell that again, and just goes through each one of these people. And it can include like the church people, the cop, but it's like each one of them gets their moment of like this cacophony of voices. But the plot is just it's not a plot, it's just a circle of like what's been going on already. And I think that in ways it seems to me so far it's kind of expanding in the sense that like it laid it all out, then it adds on a detail, adds on the cop, adds on the donkey attack and the Chinese thing. And then maybe next week adds on something else. So it's sort of like growing, kind of like the haze might be quote unquote growing or like spreading. The fact that he's named Planet and Widespread sort of like also hints for something like that. But it may also be the opposite in the end, in which it's like honing in on one particular thing, which is the government, disregard for Aboriginal sovereignty and for Aboriginal people. But it is just that. And so first of all, I guess, do you agree with that kind of assessment just from the pieces that you've read, that it is just sort of, I mean, it does not care about linear cause and effect storytelling. That's for sure. There's no doubt there.
No, I mean, I see things in it that, and hearing you talk about it now, I see things that would be sort of reminiscent of like a Charles Dickens serialization of the reading, where like you do need to like touch back and make all these reminders of like, this is what this person is, and like this person of multiple names, like Planet, Widespread, Cosman Steel, is out like we return to our hero out in the desert with his broke down falcon, trying to get his best friend Donkey into the car. And then I like your idea of this sort of like the solar system, what's it called, like the diagram, or like the
diorama.
Diorama of the sort of solar system diorama of these like elliptical orbits that pass through the sun, the greater point, right? But I don't know. That's not how I feel, but I also haven't been reading as much as you have. But I definitely see I see where you get that idea, and I can see it slipping into that. Because I haven't read enough to see that repetitive, but absolutely, like I've been on two, this is the third podcast, and I've listened to one that I wasn't on, and it really is like I don't feel like I've missed a lot.
No, yeah, there's really not. And it's altering the way that we think about and talk about the book too. Like in most cases, most books I really like don't rely upon like heavy plotting. Like I would argue that most like open letter books don't, most Stelky books I sign on or acquired don't. Most of the books I like to read don't require like a to B to C, intricate plot, except for mystery novels. Like that's where it's necessary, and those are great. They have their own charms. But for this, it doesn't, not necessarily that. But at the same time, like on the trying to talk about it every week and read the pages for every week, it becomes like a little bit tricky in the sense of like, we're kind of just going over the same thing over and over and over again. And reading it, almost stalling out. It's like, I'll be reading and I'll be like, can something else, it's altering my perception of enjoyment of this book, because I know that I have to talk about it. And having to talk about it in some way makes it like, give me something to hold on to that's like a new bit of information, a new take, a new term. Like native title was one that, like, when Emmett started talking about that and talking about, in this case, the basics card, that Aboriginal sovereignty is like, I don't even have a basics card. I can't even buy stuff out here in the ocean. And like, it's pretty clear from context, but it is a card that's given from the government. It's essentially like a welfare card to populations that need to be supported. And it's essentially like an EBT sort of setup where, you can only buy certain goods. It's good for this sort of thing. And that's clear through context, but that hadn't been referenced before. So there is something, if there was like a larger Australian socio-historical context to it, we could talk about that. But for the most part, I'm just like hitting the same thing where it's like, okay, Cosman Steel still looking for that donkey. And he's like, you know what's going to happen when the war starts, the Arabs won't give us oil and there won't be any cars and nobody can fly. So we got to have the donkeys. And like, I've read this no fewer than 14 times now. Right. And to say something new about like, oh, he wants to get his donkeys and there's all these feral donkeys. Like, yeah, no shit. Like that's been there since like page 7. Like that's it's unchanging. So talking about it is weird. And it's creating this sense of me of like, and I will, this is not meant to be like a humble brag or anything, but the other books that I'm reading physically, I'm listening to Moby Dick, which is in preparation for Melville, which is a giant book. I am reading the 3rd volume of Proust, giant ass book. And then having for class to finish The End by Telebartus, which is an archipelago-sized 575-page book, which is, maybe extra pages, and then reading this thing. These are all like ginormous books, and having to read them for like, Proust is for pleasure, but like also sort of not. And then the other ones are like for work-related things. I'm like crunching pages. I'm like chewing pages here and like I'm eating the tape, so to speak, for this podcast. And this book doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. It is slow. It is hazy. It is repetitive in a way that's like, not just like the words are repetitive. It's repeating like just the same plot points, the same articulation of like their desires. all that's kind of the same. So like I'm getting to the point where I'm like sort of not skimming per se, but like diving in and out and like coming in and out of like reading it. And like I'll read closely at points and be like, this is very funny. I love this sort of rhythm. I like the prose of it, the linguistic style, but like I'm pull back out till I get to like another section. But then when we talk about on here, anytime we read a section out loud, I'm like, this is really great. Like this is really great, but it is just like it's like yards and yards and yards of the same great material. And it doesn't get like made into, you better not have just flashed everyone. But anyway,
we're
gonna get canceled. I mean, we already got problems. But like there's yards and yards and yards of like the same material, but it's not necessarily being woven into anything per se.
Right.
It's all just kind of like you can explore this same territory, and the pattern repeats itself and the pattern repeats itself, and we get it. And again, I don't want this to be like sound like I don't like this book. I enjoy reading it. It is difficult to talk about every week though.
Yeah. And I mean it does. The more you talk about that, and like I know I brought up the idea of diving into the reasons behind, because I found myself skimming as well, and just kind of looking for not terms, but like looking for lines to kind of hang on to. But you shut that down pretty quickly, so I'm not going to talk about skimming in that way. But all I can think of listening to you describe it right now is those sorts of serialized books, or like the oral tradition, where you do have to like circle back and circle back and circle back so that people remember things. And like, what if, by the end of the book, by the end of the 600 some odd pages, those are the main, like those are the main things you're supposed to take away, is like Aboriginal communities suppressed, oppressed, governmentally unsupported. Like, I mean, I don't know, like 600 pages of that, if that's going to get like a few more people to be aware, I suppose. But that was kind of my like, maybe getting us to skim as part of the structure, or Alexis Wright's intent, to prove a point, and you shot that down. But
I want to clarify shooting that down.
No, you just said that's bullshit, and then you like started talking about something else. You don't have, there's nothing to clarify.
This is not a conversation that took place on this podcast. This is a private conversation.
You made it very clear.
No, what I was trying to indicate is that I don't think that an author sets out with an intent to trick their audience into doing something. I think that her intention is to create something that is hazy, that is circular, that is like these patterns, and that our reaction of like, oh, now we're skimming it, but getting these points on it is separate from her intent. That's what my point was, that she's not trying to like be like, oh, see, that's the reason. Now you're skimming. See, gotcha. Like, no, she's like, she has her own reasons for writing in this way and for wanting to convey what she conveys in this particular way. Our reaction to it and then justifying it by being like, oh, she wants us not to read it carefully. It's like, I don't think that's true. That's the part that I think is bullshit.
You think women having ideas
conversations
about literature, private conversations. Now I'm not allowed to flash my boobs on your podcast, your webcast, my body, and I'm not allowed to have like, I'm allowed to be a guest, but not allowed to have ideas. Like, you're making it tricky. I am Aboriginal sovereignty. I am the small community. I want your donkeys off my beach. You come in here with your donkeys.
That sounds like a metaphor.
Sand.
Oh my God.
But yeah, to go back, it makes me think of Dickens. It makes me think of the oral tradition. It makes me think of War and Peace. And part of it is because the War and Peace thing, also because it's this long, and it has to remind you of what's going on and who these characters are, but also the haze. That was like the one takeaway. There was one kid in my Russian lit seminar in undergrad who was like so upset about War and Peace because there's nothing. It's all just like fucking smoke. That's all it is. It's just more smoke and more fucking smoke. So the haze thing reminds me of that. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how into it I would be after, or will be after. I mean, how long is it? It's 500 pages, 600 pages,
It's 660 pages.
660 pages. Yeah, I don't know how much I'll still be into it, but I think it's also interesting when you say that your interest is, it sounds like your interest is also going along this like elliptical sort of. So I'm interested to see the next section again. And
Now that you caught up.
go back to the next section. And see where, if that sort of reignites your interest or brings that ellipsis closer to the sun.
Yeah. This book
It's
could
so
eclipse
cold.
the sun.
It's so cold where
Seriously,
we
it's
are right
so
now.
thick. It's so thick this could eclipse the sun. Little block book floating out there and as a celestial object. Yeah, I do wax and wane on my interest in it, honestly. Like there are points where I'm like, this is great, I'm into it, and then points where I'm just like, okay, this is fine. And that makes it interesting. And this is a good segue, I think, that you set up to talk about Sam's review. So the New York Times review that came out in February, but I just, it's online as of like this week or something, or it was in print maybe this week. And as such, I found it. But the first like half of it, or more than half of it, is essentially laying out the exact thing that we've been laying out. Like this takes place in Australia's Northern Territory. The town is suffering from intervention, collective term for the actual legislation enacted in 2007 that restricted access to alcohol and pornography in Aboriginal communities, has like the police presence. This was published 6 months before a failed referendum in which they're supposed to be able to have representation. It's like all of the background that we need to have. Like even like when it gets down to like cutting into the book, the audacious satire and praiseworthy has more global aims too. Cosman Steele, also known throughout the novel as Planet and Widespread, is the family's errant patriarch, a dreamer who believes he can end the planet's catastrophic reliance on fossil fuels and its disproportionate impact on indigenous communities, blah, blah, blah. So it's the same thing that we're doing, essentially. Like here is like the importance of this book has to be stated, stated like directly in order to provide the context to even discuss it. Like we ran in that problem on the first 2 episodes essentially, and had to get Emmett on to like truly clarify some things. But doing that kind of like background research was necessary. If we don't have this context, there's no way to talk about the book. And then once you do, the problem becomes like, how do you criticize this book? Or how do you discuss it in depth in terms of its like art and craft when 50% of what you're doing is explaining why it's important that it exists?
Yeah.
So
does Sam's review talk about like, what does it say about the book?
So that's where it gets down into that. So it refers to this as satire, which we're good with, and is true, and talks about the Cosman Steele's like idea of going to get the donkey, so on and so forth, and then sort of summarizes the same sort of things that we've been summarizing that are in every section. Causes desire. So this is his bit in a paragraph that begins with, whereas Ahab's monomaniacal quest for the white whale is a tale of revenge, an archetypical story of Western man's inimical relationship to nature, causes desire to become a, quote, supercharged Aboriginal millionaire created by a god donkey is about safeguarding his people's future by bringing an invasive species into harmony with its surroundings. His wife, Dan Steele, trails the fabled pathways known as songlines of, quote, glasswings, Carpentaria pearlwhites, yellowgrass skippers, unquote, and other butterflies and moths on her own quest to find a people smuggler to take her to China, where she may have ancestral roots and where she believes her family can be safe. So explaining kind of that concept, and then talks a bit about that as the plot, and then talks about how there's these clashing worldviews. There's 10 oracles that narrate the novel that overlap, all kind of more or less again what we're saying. Now, when it gets down to the book itself, talks about Tommy Hawk, being inundated by the internet and the news, so on and so forth. He becomes obsessed with it. Same exact thing. The entirety of like the vast majority of this review, and this again is not to criticize this review, which is very helpful and very good, but is the same thing that we've done. Here's the historical and social context. Here is the basic plot points. And then he does get down to this. Plot lines that don't and this is the 2 paragraphs I think are crucial. Plot lines that don't quite intersect and conflicts that aren't resolved will challenge some readers. but Wright's symphonic command of language sustains the novel's architecture over its more than 600 pages. Butterflies identified by their scientific names share the page with ancestral serpents, and Wright is just as comfortable with emojis and online parlance from the 2010s as she is with the vibrant Australian vernacular spoken by her characters. I'm going to skip the next line because I don't agree with it. The book's 10 parts circle back in time unrelentingly, revisiting events and past language as different versions of the truth come to light and tragedy accumulates. The layering of time and the riot of language are Wright's great themes and raw materials. And in Praiseworthy, the most ambitious and accomplished Australian novel of the century, that's the pull quote, they twist and shimmer, doomed forever to their violent pas de deux. Pas de deux. I'm not sure how to say that.
Yeah.
So it does get into a bit of the book from an aesthetic angle, but not on a line by line level per se, just in a like, it's symphonic and these things overlap and there's different viewpoints. And I think the line by line thing is both the strength and weakness of this book. It is the fun part to read and to read aloud, but it's just so overstuffed that sometimes I don't think the new versions add something crucial or add anything that's like even that enjoyable. Some of the jokes just aren't that funny.
What do you mean by what do you mean by new versions? Sorry.
So like when
each new section?
Widespread or when Cosman Steele is talking about his hating his fascist son. So he's going to say he's going to refer to Tamioka's fascist son like 14 times.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's like the first time it's like, oh, that's really funny to get like out of nowhere being like that stupid fascist. I told Dancy's dumb fascist baby, and she's like, you can't call a baby a fascist. You're like, that's a pretty good, like you're doing like a bit here. And then like the next, like the time in this one where it's like easily the fourth or fifth time that comes up, he's like, that boy, I always said that boy was a fascist. His mom didn't want me to say he was a fascist, but he sure is. Look at his iPhone, fascist iPhone, don't even have the energy to do it. And I'm like, okay, like this isn't as funny the ninth time. Yeah. It's like not the rule of threes. It's like it's like wanting to do bits but not quite having them structured that way. And I think, and that makes it's really difficult, I think, to talk about this book in that critical way, because we don't have a culture that supports criticism of anything that's like has a great social benefit to it. And this book is framed by that great social benefit. So I don't know. I've been talking a lot, and I know you have ideas and have your own take on things. So why don't I turn it over to you?
Do I?
You're allowed to now. I've granted you permission. I'm the government. I'm the Australian government saying, here's a basics need card or whatever it was called. Basics card.
You've issued me my basics card.
Yeah, I issued you your basics card, and now you've got like native title to the next 10 minutes of the podcast.
I like how his native title is that he wants is just like the donkeys. It's not even about land. It's just
and the cemetery.
Oh, and the cemetery, yeah. Yeah, I don't. I'm thinking about the idea of criticism and critiquing, and like we're not talking about it's interesting because we're not talking about or picking apart the content. We're talking about picking apart the presentation of the content. And so and I'm interested. So I actually there's a I don't know how many used bookstores there are in Iowa City, but I went to one called Haunted Bookshop this last weekend and found there were 2 copies of Carpentaria, if that's the correct way to pronounce it, but the hardcover copy and then the paperback, which is the I think it is the Australian edition. So
yeah,
some Australian person dropped it off, or someone doesn't matter. So I picked that up and I bought it, and I bought it with the intention of reading it because after last week and saying that like I was really into Alexis Wright's style, and I am into I'm curious to see what else, but last week it was like, oh yeah, I'm totally down to read like 600 pages of this style and to read another 600-page book in the same style, but yeah, the more you sort of sit in it, or this week, the sort of sitting in this space of this chapter, it's like, would I though? And and I don't remember what Emmett said, if her other books are written similarly, or if she has more of a, if this is her like stylistic trademark, or is it something else? And I meant to look into Carpentary and see.
I've read a bit of that, and the line by line is similar, but
Mm,
the sort of structure and topic seems slightly different.
yeah.
But maybe not entirely. It still has that what you're referring to as the oral tradition and that. But I think of the oral tradition in this sense slightly different than the Dickens thing they're
Oh, it's
referencing, like
totally
the
different. Yeah.
serial nature of the Dickens. Yeah, those have like that. You have to sort of they meet out information, and this book doesn't really need to meet out information per se. It's just
Mhm.
about the atmosphere and the creation of the atmosphere, and that's where again, like it's just one of those complicated things where you can be like, yes, this is a good book, in terms of its meaning and its content and its position. Great book, important book. People should know this book.
Mhm.
Are they going to, as Sam says, are they going to enjoy necessarily reading it? Maybe not. I think there's a good wide part of the population that would just throw this book across the room and just be like, no, fuck this. I don't need this anymore. And yet it's in those moments that are really delightful. But the fact that it is so dedicated to this explosive continual outpouring of
Mhm.
reiterative devices, which I enjoy, like as a structure, as a concept, totally love, and therefore
Absolutely.
as a
Yeah.
whole, with like as a fractal idea of fractals within literature, as an idea of like how repetition works, how memory works, and like when you're saying the oral tradition, the bringing things back, reminding people where they were, telling people how that was going on. That's like a really interesting craft technique that exists in Don Quixote through everything else, where you just kind of like, hey guys, real quick, just so you remember, bang. It
Mhm.
happens we talked about it in my class with the Icelandic mystery novel, because in a lot of detective novels, there's moments where the detective like reframes everything that you sort of know, but only emphasizing certain clues. So it like
Mhm.
leaves things out, but like re-catches you up. Like, oh, remember this person had this going on, and this is the one thing we know, blah, blah, blah. And like that reiterative device, I really like. I don't know that I like it as much in this. Like I like the concept. I don't know that the individual line reading page by page, and it might just be them eating pages, but like
Mhm.
it's sometimes I'm like, fuck yeah. And other times I'm like, oh God, am I almost done?
Oh God. Oh no.
Oh no.
You made a
How long
horrible
is this
mistake.
book? This book is the most uncomfortable book to hold in your hands. This and the Archipelago book are both like nearly unreadable physical objects. Like, not to
Um,
continually bitch about this, but I'm serious. This is why ebooks should predominate, is that I can't hold this fucking thing open. Neither of them. They're like, all their spines are cracked. It's like,
we
I'm an
need
old man. Get your donkeys off my goddamn books.
we need to get some sort of calcium supplement to sponsor the 2 months review podcast.
Anytime you say calcium supplement, I think of something very different.
Oh, I know. We all know. We're all very aware. Um, yeah, I and thinking about other books is like I've used this book. I've used Praiseworthy a couple times in the translation workshop that I'm teaching right now, of like it's possible to string a bunch of adjectives, or I think it's mostly adjectives and not nouns, but I think there are nouns in places where it is possible to string these adjectives together, or these adjective nouns, without commas, and it works. And I think it's an important way to show, show translators also to, like, if the author's doing it in a source language, it's possible to do it in English. But I think whatever way Alexis Wright is doing it, or the way that she is doing it, is in a way that's not like notice that's not something we're not talking about. That we're not talking about these like run-on descriptions of, um like she's like the involuntary forced group of voluntary, like, support workers looking for the, like, all these contradictory terms. She does it in a way that, like, that's literally this, we're not talking about that, we're not. And I've I yeah, I have, my Kindle is charging in a different room. I was reading it on the iPad also, so I don't have an example right in front of me that I'm talking of. But um, I think it's great, and I think it's a good way to show people that you can write and can translate in and use that style, and that it
Yes.
can work, but you just have to like find a way, like whatever way she's doing it. And I was thinking about this last night because I was talking to a student about it, or writing comments to a student about this, of like the words that she chooses, or the the order in which she puts them makes it so natural. And I don't think there's been a single time that I've tripped up on these strings of adjectives. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, they all like, they're either sequential or they all follow after one another. And I think those parts are really, really fun and really beautiful. And also funny at times. And then you do have like I'm also, speaking of big books, I'm still listening to Duck's Newburyport, and my audiobook for The Deluge is now available again for download, so I can finish the last like 50 pages. But those are also two big honking books, two completely different. I think the Lucy Ellman is closer in the stream, not the stream of consciousness, but closer in that sort of run-on, continual, no breaking of things. I have not looked at the print book,
Mhm.
so I don't know what it looks like. But that's also a different. It's completely different. She's not doing like, it is oral tradition in the sense of like
What's up?
it's a woman talking to herself.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering now, and you've said it a few times, like it's fun when you guys read the sections, or read sentences out loud from Praiseworthy. Would you find it more enjoyable as an audiobook instead of reading it? Like I'm super
Probably.
enjoying Duck's Newburyport as an audiobook, of like just like have it's like listening to someone walk around like talking into their watch, and like all these so I wonder if it would be more enjoyable to have it read to you, because then those strings and that like ongoing there might be more of a noticeable like rhythm or cadence to it, which regardless of whether you remember every single little section or not, would just, I guess, fall into place more.
I think a production of this, there isn't one, is there? I think
No, I
that
couldn't find one.
I couldn't either. I didn't, or I think I looked and didn't see one, just gave up. But the a production of this with someone who does slightly different voices would
Mm-hmm.
make the bits land. Like, because there are like things that are in here that are like meant to be comedic and
Yeah.
almost read like sketches, right? So like, and this is so related to what you're saying. Like the vocality of Ducks Newburyport is like its entirety of style
Mm-hmm.
is like it being a vocally spoken or thought book. What I forget what the phrase is now, that repeats and repeats and repeats. That
The
repetition,
fact that.
that repeats the fact that over and over again, that works in a way to create a cadence, whereas the
Mm-hmm.
repetition in this book is to not is doesn't serve that purpose. It has a different function to it, and I think that's interesting. And then on the line by line basis, Alexis Wright is very like, they both have that kind of stream run on way of doing things. Whereas I think in Ducks Newburyport, we had an episode where we talked about how it sort of double negates itself. Like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it's X then blank that sort of walks it back. And it has like a pattern that goes on with it. And
Yeah.
this does in a different way. And maybe next week we can just like really zone in on like 5 or 6 lines and how they actually function, and see like how the on that basis this book is working. But like to your point, and then we'll have to do our lines of the week and go, because I have to do an interview with for class. But here's like what on page 364 in my edition. I'm going to read essentially two little sections that are about the donkeys. Okay, so same wise, in a time of flux, the hordes of wild donkeys did not care who was on the beach, period. The hordes stormed, knocking people over like sticks, period. They went crazy, period. There were packs of donkeys all over the place, rearing up on hind legs like they were dreaming of being hi-ho silver, or they were kicking out their back legs and rolling in the sand in the middle of the involuntary lady searchers, fanning themselves while trying to stare out into the hazy sea at sunset, annoyed with being lumbered with 2 jobs. Like the transitions there from the packs of donkeys, so you get the quick hits, they've gone crazy, they're rearing up, you have the visual of them rearing up, kicking out their legs, rolling in the sand, and then the subject switches immediately. Middle of the involuntary lady searchers fanning themselves, who are annoyed with having to have 2 jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of transition and like not the viewpoint, but in the subject of that is interesting. And then at the bottom of the same page, There was no end to the troubles, for the donkeys were attacking the gangs of toddlers in nappies, trying to kill these animals indiscriminately with sticks. And as the hordes of donkeys and dogs fought one another, the oblivious children playing rounders on the beach and having a good old time were also attacked. Which is a more circular setup for that. I was starting with the toddlers going through the dogs and donkeys back to the toddlers being attacked.
We didn't talk about the fucking kids with their pocket knives.
Yeah. And like they're like whipping donkeys with sticks. Like this is, I mean, it's Australia. If you don't have a pocket knife, how are you going to survive in the whoop whoop? If you're out in the whoop whoop, you better have a knife and a stick for those tarantulas and those snake creatures.
Seriously.
And the sea hag or whatever she's called.
Yeah. I will say really quick side note, I really do like that the parents are like, oh, we have to go find our toddlers that are like obviously down by the beach and they're like hidey holes putting snacks and iPhones wherever. And the cops are like, yeah, come get your toddlers. And the toddlers are like, you guys are just, like cramping we're just hanging out here with like the spirits of old. Like, let us be. Like, I love that the kids are just like more connected to the old. I thought that was fun. But toddlers and nappies with pocket knives was
fun. I like to when they like find someone, someone's called the Canberra office for Aboriginal affairs and they're like, motherfucker, I go see where my toddler is now, because maybe they've been on the phone and like everyone's like freaking out in the morning. So anyways, we have to go. So what's your line of the week? Do you have a favorite line that you marked or that you have access to, or are you out of luck because your Kindle's
No, I do. I have so many. There were so many that I really liked. And there's one thing I wanted to point out, or not point out, but one line where which I thought was just no, okay, I'll just do one of my favorite. There's so many favorite ones though. But the one that I wrote down on my phone is the old woman of the sea, had a hint of a smile on her face as she roared down from the clouds, and in her speed she kicked the crocodiles swimming too near Aboriginal sovereignty and sent them flying to the mangroves down the coast where she had seen them a month before, because this like old sea woman is just like casually like kicking crocodiles and hammerhead sharks in the stomach, and like and but in this like really like kind way.
Yeah, the last chapter of this book, the last section, is the giant kelp hair sea lady gulped! Exclamation point. So excellent. She's around for the rest of this. Mine is in our edition, page 403. So it's a little bit past where we're supposed to do this, or supposed to read to, but this is from Dance's perspective. Listen to me, she pleaded to the Chinese embassy in Canberra. Do you know where such and such a place was in China? Another Chinese place named smashed, crumpled, destroyed by the mispronouncer. Another name pronounced like nothing else heard on earth and spelt in the dialect of the worst Aboriginal pidgin English from the Praiseworthy region.
Oh my God.
It's great. She's like, that made me think of the slang too. So for next week, we go up to page 463, which is in the Sitting in the Bones section, is up to section 12 of that part. So 1 through 11 of Sitting on the Bones, finish up the one that we're doing this week, and then 1 through 11 of Sitting in the Bones for next week. And there's like 4 episodes left counting next week. So we're getting there with this. And I think next week a good idea would be to actually take like 4 or 5 lines, mark ones that you think that can really get into the style and like how this functions, since the meta commentary is probably less important at this point than is the individual bits. So anyways, thanks for coming on. I will see you later. If you're watching us, follow us on YouTube, hit that like button,
smash that like button,
smash that like button like you got a cuck chair in your living room.